What is this?
Circle.
A circle. You had a circle before. What's different about this one as compared to the other one? It's got more points on it. Right. So what's the point? There. Now, what we're going to be doing to start the lesson is kind of just recapping your homework a little bit, what we did. And we're going to fill out all the points that we know. So, but before we fill out all the points that we know, I want to just talk about the angle measures of each of these points. So it starts here at 0 degrees. And I want you guys to mark this as we go. And then it goes up by 15. So go ahead and mark that now. Goes up by 15 degrees each time. Cool. And once we've done that, we're going to mark the points, the coordinates of the points that we already know. So, which are the points that we already know? Well, we know 0 degrees. That point is at 1, 0. We know at 90 degrees, that's at 0, 1. We know at 30 degrees, it was 0.866, 0.5. At 45 degrees, you guys remember this one? 707, right? 0.707, 0.707. And then this one, 60 degrees, was just flipped, so it was 0.5, 0.866. Cool? But we noticed that we have 2 points here that are additional that we didn't have before. So it's 15 degrees and 75 degrees. Now, here is the conundrum. Everybody take out your ruler. If you don't have one, raise your hand. I'll give you a paper ruler. Some of them have been slightly used. Previously used. You guys ever shop at Goodwill? Yes. I hope so. Good shirts. Anybody else? Yeah. Yep. I'll be fine. Anybody else? You can use a protractor too. Usually your protractor has a ruler on the bottom of it. There you go.
This isn't 12 inches.
Yeah. It is 10 inches. Now, you take your ruler and go ahead and measure the radius of the circle. Measure the radius of the circle. tell me what you get. Yes.
I like my very best.
What's the radius? 2 3/4. Yeah, cool. 2.75 inches. Now wait a second. Wait a second. What did we say about the radius of our circle to get the coordinates of those points? Radius was 1, right? So we've got a little bit of a predicament here. Obviously, if I printed you out 1-inch circles, it would look like this. And that would be very difficult to use, right?
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
It would be very challenging to use those 1-inch circles. And so I printed out a larger circle for you. But in printing out a larger circle, the radius is no longer 1 inch. So, what's that mean about these coordinates? They would be wrong, right? But I don't want them to be wrong. I want them to be right. So, how could I relegate this? How could I make this work? How could I get the coordinates of this point and this point and have them be similar to these points here? Or in other words, go ahead and measure the x and y coordinates. Don't write it down on that paper because you're going to want it nice and clean. But go ahead and use your ruler and see if you can measure the x and y coordinates. Just get the x for now. Get the x coordinate of that first point at 15 degrees. See if you can figure what that is. What's the length? What are you finding here? It's like 2.6 or something, right? Right? So it's basically like 2.6. So I'll write that down. You don't write it down, just I'll write it down. So the x would be 2.6 inches, and what would the height be? So find the height of it now. Find the height. How many inches would that be?
Half an inch.
0.7.
Half an inch.
Anyone else get 0.7? Yeah? So 0.7 inches.
Yeah.
So if I wrote that down, well, that would be 2.6 and 0.7. Do not write this down. Okay, do not write it down. But if I did, this would be 2.6 and that would be 0.7. Does that make sense? I'd go from 0 to 0.7 to 0.5? No. Or from 1 to 2.6 to 0.86? No. So that's not accurate. Well, why is it not accurate? The other points was when it was 1 inch, right? So this whole circle now is on a bigger scale. So how could I get these points to reflect the same scale as I had before?
You multiply them by the scale factor.
True. Very good. But what's the scale factor?
2.75.
So I would multiply this by 2.75?
You're wrong.
Divide. The scale factor here would be 1 over 2.75. So I would divide, and I'd get 2.6 divided by 2.75 is 0.95, let's say. 0.95. And 0.7 divided by 2.75 is about 0.25. Okay? So those are the coordinates scaled to a 1 inch circle, a circle of 1 inch radius. Does that make sense? So this one would be then not 2.6 but 0.95 and not 0.7 but 0.25. Does that make more sense now, guys? Yeah, that's pretty clear, right? Now, what do you think this point here, 75 degrees, would be if you had to guess? 0.25, comma, 0.95. It's the same thing but flipped, right? Good. That's cool. Good. Now, what we're going to do now is we want to get the rest of the points around the circle, right? So in order to do that, you have to use what you needed to figure out for the homework, right? Which was using the quadrants. This is quadrant 1. You can go ahead and mark these. Quadrant 2, quadrant 3, and quadrant 4. In quadrant 1, the x and the y are both what? Positive. In quadrant 2, the x is negative, the y is positive. In quadrant 3, they're both negative. In quadrant 4, the x is positive, the y is negative. So using that and all your points in the first quadrant, you can go ahead and find all the points around the whole circle. So go ahead and do that now. For instance, I'll just do a couple points on each. Like this one here would be, instead of 0.25, it would be negative 0.25 and 0.95. Okay? So that one is that. So go ahead and use that and get the rest of the points around the circle. Thank you. How you guys doing? You getting it? All right. I'm gonna mark up mine too, so you guys can check against mine. Mm-hmm. Okay. So yours should look very much like that. That's pretty cool, I think. So we've been able to label the coordinates of all these points around the circle. Good. Now, if you would be so kind, go ahead and flip your paper to back. And the first thing I want you to do is cross out where it says height and put instead of height, put X. And where it says length, cross that out and put Y. So height should just say X, and instead of length, put Y. Now, what this is a table of values. So in the first table, you're going to put the X coordinates of the points. In the second table, you're going to put the Y coordinates. So this is all just one table. It goes from 0 to 345. So there wasn't enough room to put it in one row. And so that's what we're going to do right now. So you're going to use the picture that you just created, and you're going to fill in those tables for X and Y. So for instance, for the X one, at 0 degrees, the X value is what? 1. So I crossed it out, I put X, because it's too confusing with height and length. So it's 1. At 15 degrees, the X value is 0.95. Good. At 30 degrees, the X value is 0.866. At 45, it's 0.707. At 60, it's 0.5. At 75, it's 0.25. At 90, it's 0. At 105, it's negative 0.25, and so on and so forth. So go ahead and fill in those tables for X and Y now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Let's do it as well.
What was that? Yep. So you're doing the X and the Y's. So I filled in the x and the y for you up to 105 degrees. And then as you finish, I'm going to fill in the rest of it now, so as you finish you can just check with mine. Yep. When you're done, you should check what your table is against what I've just written on the board. Hello? Hey. Oh yeah, he did. You're welcome. How you guys doing? Good? Yeah? Good? Okay. Cool. Now, what do you think the last thing that you're going to have to do is? Graph those points. Okay, so the last part of this is to graph those points. So you've been provided with a graph, or a plot rather, and you're going to graph them. So let's take a look. The horizontal axis usually would be your x-axis, and the vertical would usually be your y-axis, but that's not always the case. Really, this is just a way of plotting one thing versus another thing. So this time our horizontal axis, what's the maximum? What's the maximum number on a horizontal axis?
360.
360. So what do you think the horizontal axis is measuring?
The degrees.
The angle, right? The angle in degrees. And the vertical axis goes up to 1.5, but really that area of interest is from -1 to 1. So that's going to be our x value. Okay? So let's give it for instance. So how do we plot it? Well, first off, let's look. Each little box on the horizontal is 5. So it's 0, 5, 10, 15, 20. You see? And each little box on the vertical is 0.1. So 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4, 0.5. You guys see that? Okay. So let's start with our first point. It's 0 degrees, 1. So that's right there. Okay. Next is 15 degrees, 0.95. So 0, 5, 10, 15. So 15 degrees, 0.95. That's about here. 30 degrees, 20, 25, 30 is at 0.866. So 0.8 is here, so 0.866 would be about there. And try and be as accurate as you can. 45, so 40, 45 degrees is here. 0.707 is just above 0.7, so that's here. 60 degrees is here, 0.5, well that's obvious. 75 degrees, 60, 65, 70, 75 degrees. 0.25 would be about here. And then 90 degrees is 80, 85, 90 is at 0, which is here. Then continuing on, 105 degrees would be 100, 105, negative 0.25 would be here. And then so on and so forth. So go ahead now and graph your points for your x and your y data. So x and your y tables. Go ahead and graph your points now. And once you're done graphing all the points, you can connect them so they're not all just discrete points. And once you've done that, you are done. And if you finish it all today, great. If you don't finish, then it's going to be homework. Any questions on that? No? Okay, cool. That's it.